Welcome to the Killer Innovation Show, the longest continuously produced podcast in history. Each week, Phil McKinney brings you the insights and strategies to amplify your creativity and innovation skills. Here's your host, Phil McKinney.
Welcome to this week's episode of Killer Innovations. This is an exciting show. We are kicking off season 18 of Killer Innovations today. We are starting our 18th year of producing the show. We started this show in 2005, and as the introduction stated, this makes us the longest continuously produced podcast in podcast history. Been around. I guess we win the Endurance Award for being the one that's still standing here after all of these years. And we are very proud of that endurance, our ability to continue to produce a show that has a following that includes you. So before we even get started, I want to say thank you. And we dedicate this show to you. Now, we thought about what could we do for the show being it's the Season 18 kickoff. And what we decided to do was actually format this into an AMA, or Ask Me Anything Q&A. So myself, the team here, many of you have been sending in questions for months on different things you want to ask about, specifically about podcasts, not about innovation and creativity. We do those kinds of Q&As on a pretty regular basis, but I've never really just talked about what it took to start the podcast, how we've been able to do it for so long, those kinds of things. So that is what today's content is all about. At the end of this show today, I'll talk about what to expect in season 18. Some new and exciting things are coming in season 18, and so you definitely want to listen to the very end. So again, that is what today's content is all about. I'm going to apologize right here at the beginning because this is going to be a little bit of a longer show than what we normally do. But hopefully you find it worth it. Love to hear your feedback. You can always drop us a note. But before we jump into the segment, got that favor to ask. Can you follow, like, and share? Follow us on social media. Like this show so it makes it easier to people to find out about us. Post a review of us over on wherever you get your podcast from. And then share it. Tell other people about the show. Help us broaden the people who are aware of our show and their content that they can also achieve innovation success. And with that, let's hop into this week's episode. Welcome to this week's podcast. This is a special show. We are launching season 18. Yes, the 18th year of the Killer Innovations podcast. We started this show back in March of 2005, having no idea that we would still be doing it going into season 18. Now, over the years, I have talked about the history of the show and etc., bits and pieces, but I'm actually going to dedicate today's show to answering your questions. The questions that you've sent in over time, some of them much more recently. Questions about the podcast. How did it get started? What's it like now starting season 18? The pros and cons. Many of you are podcasters. Some of you maybe want to be podcasters. So many of you or all of you are innovators. So we'll talk a little bit about the challenges of innovating a new media format of podcasting back in 2005. So I have a collection here, 2 pages of questions. It's a long list, longer than I thought it was going to be. I have not pre-canned answers, so I'm literally going to read these on the fly, live, and answer them as we go through this. And we're going to go for the normal length of a time of a show, and I'll try to answer as many of these questions as possible. And they kind of go in a little bit of a chronological order. So the early part of the show will be history of the podcast all the way down to what's coming next, what is in the future. So you're going to want to stay to the end, because at the end we're going to talk about what is the plans for season 18 and beyond for the Killer Innovations podcast. So here we go. This is the list of questions that you have sent in, and that's what we're going to spend today's show answering. So question number 1, what was the original impetus for the podcast? Well, the podcast started in 2005, but way before that, back when actually my first job, I was hired by a gentleman by the name of Bob Davis. He became my mentor. And Bob put me through probably one of the most unique mentoring experiences I'd ever had. Given I was new out of college, I didn't have many, but even now, 40 years later into my career, I've never seen a mentoring program like what Bob did for my career. Very, very heavy rotation, lots of experiences across every function and role within a company. And those variety of experiences gave me the confidence that when something got presented to me, a problem or a new company or a new technology that I had no experience for, to just go and do it. So many, many years later, I went back and was meeting with Bob, thanking him and acknowledging him for the investment he made in me early, which set me down a path that I attribute a lot of my success to. And I asked Bob, how do I pay you back? And he laughed and he goes, look, you can't pay me back. You have to pay it forward. You have to share your learnings, your experiences, your expertise, the pains you went through with the next generation, the people who are going to come up behind you and take on the roles that you've had. And I thought about it, and I could do, mentoring of, individual people and, staffs, that reported to me, or somebody that I found in an organization. But, you're mentoring one person at a time. And I was interested in saying, is there a way to scale this? Could I share in a broader format? And so that was what turned out to be really the impetus for the podcast. Podcast was brand new in 2005. And I thought, okay, we've got this audio format. Don't know how popular it's going to be or how many people would even be interested in listening to me. So let's go and try doing this thing called a podcast. So that was the impetus. It was to respond to Bob's challenge to pay it forward, and then my own challenge to myself about how do you pay it forward at scale. Which kind of leads into question number 2. What was your inspiration for the format and structure of the early podcast? Oh, that's real simple. Bob Davis actually got me hooked on to a motivational speaker by the name of Earl Nightingale. You can actually go to Spotify, search for Earl Nightingale. Bunch of his programs are out there. You can listen to it. The guy's phenomenal. He's unfortunately has passed away, but I turned into being a huge Earl Nightingale fan, big fan. And I subscribed to a monthly audio magazine that he put out called Insight. And it was short little things about leadership and management and teams and personal motivation and positive thinking. But the Inside Audio magazine, which keep in mind, we're talking 1980, 1981, 82, came out on cassette tapes. So I would get this cassette tape, put it in my car, and that's what I listened traveling to and from work. In fact, I still have every issue of Insight Audio magazine on its original cassette tapes still in my office here. I just can't even fathom the idea of throwing them away. But you can listen to them. A bunch of them have been digitized and are up on Spotify. So check that out. Earl Nightingale, Insight, over on Spotify. Question number 3, how did you put out the first podcast? Well, the very first podcast was March 5th, 2005. I actually was, read up about a little bit about the podcast. And basically had my laptop. I was actually at a conference at a Marriott resort in Phoenix, Arizona. And I had a little $5 microphone that plugged into the microphone jack on the side of the laptop. And I went and sat in the bathroom at the Marriott resort and recorded the first podcast, not having a clue what I was going to talk about, the format, the content. Nothing is like what it was today. But I went out and just shared and talked about innovation and technologies and a whole wide range of things. And then I posted it up on my blog site. Already had a blog. And my blog had actually been live since 1996. So I already had 9 years into the blog, and I just treated it like a blog with an audio download. And I put it up there and posted about it on some of the community sites and that of the early podcasters to see if anybody would listen to it and give me some feedback. And I actually got some people downloading it. And I got emails from people saying they really liked it and etc. And I got so excited that actually I did that on the weekend. And on Wednesday of that week, I actually put out a second episode. So 3 days later, I put episode number 2 up. And then it's been an ongoing grind ever since then. Next question. How did your podcast get traction? How did people find out about the podcast? Well, as I shared, I posted information about the podcast on things like, different podcasting community sites, and they were popping up all over the place. Podcasting was new. People were interested in it. And one person, Adam Curry, now for those of you who are my generation or maybe even a little older than me, you're going to remember Adam Curry, who was an MTV VJ back in the 70s. When MTV, all they played was music videos. So rather than being a DJ like on a radio station, they were actually video jockeys. They would schedule and cue the videos for different music videos on MTV. So that's where Adam started. Adam was one of the very early people involved in podcasting. So Adam had a podcast that he called Daily Source Code, probably one of the very earliest of the podcasts. It's no longer out, being produced, but it was one of the early ones. And Adam, and it was daily. He literally put out a podcast every day. And Adam would promote shows that he listened to and he liked. Well, somehow he found my show and he actually promoted it on Daily Source Code. And man, it exploded. It was like everybody that was into podcasting all of a sudden now is downloading my podcast. Which caused a different problem because back in those days, you got charged for bandwidth coming into your blog sites. Well, audio files were big. And all of a sudden, I was incurring unexpected expenses because of Adam Curry promoting my podcast on Daily Source Code. And that was really what kickstarted and really put the show onto on the map. Next question. What would be some surprising podcast history that others would find interesting? Well, as I was sharing before, there was all these sites where you could actually list, your podcast so people could find it, communities where you could ask for advice from other podcasters, those types of things. Unfortunately, I'm a software engineer by training, coding background. Had already been doing a bunch of work in XML, which is the underlying technology, plus this thing called an enclosure tag, which allowed for podcasting to even exist. Well, one of those early sites, what they used to call a podcast directory, and you would submit your podcast, and then they would eventually list it in the directory, and that's how people went out and found podcasts. This is pre-Apple doing anything with podcasting, Google, anybody. And remember, this is 2005. So one of those podcasting sites was a company called Odeo. And Odeo had a podcast directory. They reached out to me because I was, one of the bigger podcasts at that time, to ask for me to list my podcast on their site as a way for them to draw traffic. And the community is very collaborative, and I'm like, yeah, sure, no problem. So I go over, I register the podcast, I list it on Odeo, and it was probably one of the first 10 podcasts on Odeo. Well, not too much after that, Apple comes out and does the Apple podcast under iTunes. And when Apple started with its own directory, with its own listings of all the podcasts, it basically killed off all the podcast directories, including Odeo. So Odeo had to pivot into a new company. So what did Odeo pivot into? Anybody know? You want to take a guess? Take a guess. What do you think Odeo pivoted into? Odeo became Twitter. That's where Twitter came from. The underlying technology behind Twitter was used by Odeo internally for support. It's how they message each other in order to fix bugs in the podcast directory, or having outages, or downloading was delayed, or whatever. They created basically, which was an SMS short message texting kind of technology to allow them to message each other while they were supporting the podcast directory. When the podcast directory blew up, Odeo became then the product. They took what was really an internal debugging support tool and turned it into a real product, and that became Twitter. So even technologies like Twitter came from the early days of podcasting. What was the original audience for the podcast? So who did we aim the original audience back in 2005? Well, that's a good question. It started off being more tech. Remember, 2005, I was already at HP, just at the time of being named CTO, probably a little bit before CTO, because this would have been in March, and I became CTO towards the end of the year that year. So I was already at HP at the time. So it tended to swing more tech just because of my role and people who knew me, knew my background, etc. And then when I became CTO at HP and started what was called the Innovation Program Office, effectively the innovation team at HP, people and the questions I was getting from the audience swung much more towards innovation. How do you innovate at HP? How could I take what you do and apply it? Now, prior to HP, I was already doing the innovation work, and in fact, HP was a client along with Agilent and loads of other companies. So the innovation work occurred way before I joined. But when I first started the podcast, just because of who I was and my background, people tended to, want to talk tech. So it had much more of a tech feel in the early days, and then became focused on the innovation. So next question kind of feeds into that. Has the target audience for the podcast changed over time? Oh, you bet. We were very tech oriented, albeit a lot of the listeners in the early days were podcasters or people who wanted to get into podcasting. So I used to get a lot of emails from people about how do you do it? And remember, there were no tools back then. So for every episode of the show, for probably the first 3 or 4 years, I had to hand code the XML every week for the new episode. And then there's a thing called ID3 tags. The ID3 tags in an audio file is what embeds the cover art. So the little art that you see when you play music on your phone or on your PC or your laptop, that cover art is literally embedded into the audio file. And that applies under what's called an ID3 tag. And under an ID3 tag, there's a bunch of other things, description of the show, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, back then, I found some open source tools that were being used by the music industry, and brought that over to do ID3 tagging work in early podcasting. And then that became kind of a standard way to do it. And so so all of these tools and trying to make this all work, a lot of the listeners in the early day of the show were all podcasters wanting to hear what tools and what technologies I was using to create the early versions of the podcast. So that's where the audience started, along with some tech, to probably by the end of year one, going into year two, really the focus on innovation, becoming really the core. What makes your show different from other podcasts? Well, one is longevity, 17 years going into 18 years, and we average between 40, 45 unique episodes, original episodes each year. So the back catalog is quite large. If you want to dig through it and find it and listen to some of the old original shows just out of grins. But I think, that, and we've stayed focused on our topic. Look, we're not a big show. We're not a show like, some of the big names, This American Life or Tim Ferriss or any of the others, right? That are the more recent, probably more famous of the podcasts now these days. But I think I am proud of the fact that we've stayed true to the content. We've stayed true to our listener base, and deliver on a regular basis, be consistent in the delivery. This kind of feeds in the next question. How have you been able to produce the show over such a long period of time? Well, I view the podcast as my creative outlet. We all have to have some form of creative outlet. We've got our jobs, and we're innovators in our day job. But what is that creative outlet? Do you write fan fiction for something that you're a big fan of? Do you're an amateur photographer? Are you an artist? A painter, a sculptor? What's your creative outlet? For me, the podcast is my creative outlet. If you can talk to the team now that supports me in the podcast, I go a little fanatical. If I think I'm going to miss a week or not have a show out, I have to skip a week or something. It's rare, and when it happens, it just really, really bothers me. So I think I view it as my creative output. It's not a job. It really is a passion for me. I love doing it, and I love hearing from the fans who are listening to the podcast each and every week. What are some of your favorite episodes? Well, I got asked this question last week by a reporter. And here it is on this list also. It's like trying to pick which is your favorite child. I mean, it's hard. One interesting statistic is who's been on the show the most. The most repeated guest. As you know, we have very rarely do we ever have repeated guests, other than the annual Consumer Electronics Show. We have kind of an overlapping set of guests for that. But normal guests not related to the Consumer Electronics Show, a series of shows that we do every January. The most repeated guest is Jeffrey Moore. Jeffrey is the author of Crossing the Chasm. He's a long time friend. And I think he's been on the show 5 times over the 17 plus years now of the show. So any of the Jeffrey Moore episodes are really, really good. Peter Guber, who is one of the co-owners of the Golden State Warriors. He's the former CEO of Sony Entertainment. He is the chairman of Mandalay Bay Entertainment. So he was the producer on the whole series of Batman movies, and he's been involved in the industry for quite some time. Peter and I met each other. We were both speaking at a conference, and then he was writing his book at the time, so he asked if he could interview me. He interviewed me. He included me in the book. I reached out, invited him on the podcast. He came onto the podcast, so the Peter Guber interview is actually another one that is quite good, to listen to. But because we've done 40 45 new episodes every year for 17 years. There's a lot of content. So I would encourage you, just go over to the site, killerinnovations.com, go to the search bar and put a topic in. And the odds are you're going to find a show that covers that topic. Next question. What have been the biggest challenge with the podcast? Well, some of the biggest challenges on doing the podcast has been the changes over time that happen, right? Listeners change, listeners' interests change, what they want to hear. Do they not want me, to talk about certain things? If you went back and listened to some of the early shows, probably for the first 3, 4, 5 years or so, a lot of the shows actually contained a lot of more personal stories from me about things going on and et cetera. And in the early days, people really liked that. But then when we got to like year 4 or 5, some people started sending in some emails asking for me to like get off the personal stuff and get to the meat of the topic quicker, spend less time on the personal things. So we made that shift, and if you notice, there's probably a little bit less personal stuff. Today's show is probably the most personal of the shows that I've done in a very, very long time for the podcast. So, but we're always listening to your feedback. What is it you like about the show? What is it you don't like? More guests, no guests, only do guests. Phil, stop talking. We've heard enough of you. We want you just to go with all guests for a while, whatever it is. So we look for those feedback. We try and experiment. But the other is dealing with changes. In the middle of the podcast, I moved from Virginia, from the horse farm, which is where I was living in the early days of the podcast, back to Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley moved 3 times, then ended up moving, retiring from HP, then ended up coming to Colorado, dealing with trying to do a podcast and moving and relocating and doing all it could get insane. And so therefore the hardest thing is, the biggest challenge is just maintaining that consistency. Because like I said before, if I think I'm going to miss a week's episode for something, if I'm just assuming I can record on, Monday or Tuesday and have the show out the following, and then all of a sudden something unexpected happens and I think I might miss the window, I start stressing out because this is my creative outlet. I really do look forward to getting onto this side of the microphone as much as possible. Hopefully you find it beneficial and it's just not me talking out to thin air. What is your advice to today's podcasters? Oh boy, let's see. Where do I start with this one? Probably the number one advice I give to new podcasters today is do not chase the numbers. I can't tell you how many podcasts get started and they go a month or maybe 2 months, and maybe they've got 50 listeners and they just throw the towel in. Oh, this isn't going to work. Don't start yet another podcast if you're not going to be committed to doing it for like 2 years. And I'm talking, if that's the case, you better be looking at 80 to 100 shows. Because if you're not willing to commit, no matter what your numbers are, to get through 80 to 100 shows, don't even start. Because it's not going to happen. You're not going to, unless you've got 3 million followers on Twitter or some insane number of followers on LinkedIn. If you're trying to use podcasts to get your information about your company out or something, you're going to be, soulfully unimpressed with your early numbers. It's just hard work. You got to endurance, consistency. That's the key. So don't chase the numbers. Focus on your content. Find the niche that has a listener base that you want to talk to, that you want to engage with. And it is engagement. It's not just sitting back in the microphone and just blabbing away. You're looking for feedback. You're looking for engagement. You're looking for followers. So you want to focus on the content. As I said before, be consistent. be consistent. Do it every week. Put your show out the same day of every week. Collaborate with other podcasters who you like. I still do this. If a podcaster's out there and they've got a show that I'm interested in, I find interesting, and they reach out to me and they want me to come on their show, not a problem. I'll have them come on my show. Podcasters, it's got to be within the niche of who my listeners would be interested in. I'm not a topic just talking about podcasting. So it's about innovation, creativity, and trends, and what does the future hold, those kinds of things. If there's a podcast out there and that podcaster wants to exchange where they come on my show, I go on their show, and we cross promote, more than willing to do that. Collaborate. You need to collaborate, because that's how you're going to grow your listener base, and that's how we make the podcasting experience better. Next question. How can someone listening to the podcast benefit from it? Well, my podcast is somewhat unique. We don't do time-sensitive stuff, or rarely, I should say. We do time-sensitive stuff, so it goes on. Our catalog is valuable for a very long time. We have a very deep, very wide back catalog of shows. In fact, 100% of our shows are available somewhere. Many of the podcasting sites, though, can't host all of our shows because it's too big. Apple doesn't like it because they don't want you to be above 300 or 400 shows. Well, we're well beyond 300, 400 episodes. But so they want to, Apple wants to limit it. But there's feeds out there that you can find that'll get you the entire feeds for the entire back catalog of the show. So I encourage people, for us is we probably have covered every topic you can think of around leadership, innovation, creativity, team building, culture, brainstorming, ideation, you name it. We've covered it. So you could just go do the search bar, find it, and at 100% of every show is on the site. Not 100% of them are in the feed, because the sites, like I said, Apple and that can't handle the sheer number of shows that we have. So, but you can search for it on the site, find the show, listen to it. So I think I probably one of the things that I recommend if you're listening to it, take notes. If you're listening to it and you're not driving your car, take notes. If you're driving your car, give yourself a voice memo for something in the show. The objective for me every episode is to give you some nuggets you can walk away with and apply to whatever role you are in. So take notes. Next question. What would you say is your biggest achievement with the podcast? A lot of people would say probably, they would probably just assume that, the biggest achievement is the sheer number of people you reach. Look, we're not a big show. We're not a Tim Ferriss. We're not a, any of the big name shows that are out there, right? Our audience base is very specific. It's around innovation. It's around creativity. And as such, we're not a general listener level kind of a podcast. But I think my biggest achievement with the podcast has been, one, in the early days, inspiring others to podcast. Inspiring the early podcasters, showing them how to use the tools and helping educate them on ID3 tags, and showing people and helping some podcasters debug their XML that they got wrong, and it's getting rejected at Apple and they can't get their new show posted, or introducing them. We were like customer number 5 at Libsyn, which is the podcast streaming download site, which 99, or I should say 90, I'm going to say 80% of all the big podcasters are all on Libsyn today. Back then, when it was in the early days, it was really, really rough. But I think the biggest achievements is inspiring and helping others to podcast. And then with our content, inspiring creatives to create and innovators to invent. Our mission here is to help all of us reignite that natural talent to change the world one idea at a time. Come up with that next idea, change the world. Next question, which we're getting down to the end of the list here. Is there something you experienced that was unexpected about your podcast? Unexpected about your podcast. Well, one is I probably the biggest unexpected benefit of the podcast, which I just never would have thought about, is when you start the podcast, you're talking into a microphone, and some magic person, the other person may at the other end may listen to it, right? And you kind of think, okay, that's done. But then in the early days, people were very active, much more so than now. Today, I'd love to get more emails from you, but I know everybody's busy and et cetera. But in the early days, a lot of people engaged, got a lot of emails. And I really worked hard at making sure I replied to every email, even after getting named as CTO at HP, which made it even, doubly tough given the workload. But, that engagement turned into being a back and forth conversation. And then it became listeners and fans of the show becoming friends. True friends. Meeting people, having people, there's one listener, I'm not going to give full names, but Woody, he knows who he is. In the early days of the podcast, Woody reached out, and I was CTO at HP, and my offices were based in Cupertino. And Woody reached out and asked, would it be okay? Could he come by and meet me? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So we made arrangements. He came to California. He lives in the Midwest, but he came out to to HP, and we met, and I showed him around the campus and such. And we've stayed in touch, and we're friends on Facebook and LinkedIn. So I see things about his kids. He saw things about my kids, and now all my posts are about my grandkids. But, we've become, friends in the form of staying connected and staying updated. And Woody had a podcast for a while, and I did an appearance on his podcast, and we did that. And then Seth actually was in college when he started listening to the podcast. He was learning graphic design at a major university, and he actually was a volunteer. He actually helped with some of the audio file work in the early days of the podcast. He volunteered, no pay, and would actually help with some of the editing work on the early audio files. Seth went on and actually founded his own commercial design firm to design logos and graphics and that for companies. And Seth actually reached out to me, and we worked together on a project where Seth and his team, his company, actually are the ones that designed the Killer Question card deck. You can buy the Killer Question card deck on Amazon or over at our store, which is innovation.tools. And that card deck was designed by Seth, who started listening to the podcast back when he was in college. I feel old every time I talk to Seth. From where he was to actually then partnering with me, we did the card deck as a joint project, and people love the card deck, and Seth gets the credit for all the design and the laying up the production and finding a printer who could do the cards the way we wanted them, etc. So I think the biggest surprise is finding fans who are willing to donate their time to the cause that I continue to try to achieve, which is paying it forward, and that then become friends. It's albeit we think of the world as a small world. We run into people we know, etc. We cross paths with people who maybe grew up in a similar area. The podcasting community and you, as listeners of this show, it's an incredible community, and I thank you for that. The last question before we get into talking about what season 18 is going to bring up is What was the most surprising experience with fans of the podcast? Oh, this is a great question. What was the most surprising experience with fans of the podcast? Well, I'm actually going to give you two because the two just absolutely stand out. Like, in fact, I'm sitting here shaking. I'm having flashbacks. The first one was in the early days of the podcast when I was traveling a lot with HP, and I was traveling 45, 50 weeks a year. Remember, I'm also doing 40, 45 shows a year. So that means many times I was recording shows in hotel rooms all over the world. And so I would literally record and I would tell people where I'm at. I did shows there's a show from Bali, there's a show from Bangkok, there's a show from Delhi, there's shows from Johannesburg, all over the world. So I would do these shows from wherever I happened to be traveling. Well, in some cases, I would actually tell people, oh, and, next month I'm going to be in London, and, the month after that I'll be in Madrid, right? So in this one case, I mentioned that I was going to be in London, and it was a conference, and I was the headliner, keynote speaker to open this conference, etc. So I just mentioned, hey, I'm going to be in London. I didn't give any of the specifics, but it didn't take people any much time with Google to figure out why I was going to be in London and what I was doing, the dates and all that. So all of a sudden, like within a couple of days of the conference, I get an email from a listener that said, hey, we're gonna host we'd like to get together with you. We'd like to invite you out to dinner if you're available on this night. And we're thinking about this place. Well, it turns out that these people got really creative. Not only did they track me down, they tracked down the hotel where the speaker was going to be at. They confirmed that I was actually going to stay at that hotel, and they literally picked a restaurant right across the street. So if you get nervous about stalkers, maybe podcasting, becoming a podcaster back then, maybe not a great idea because they find you. So in this case, they actually hosted a party for me, and fans came from all over the UK. Some even flew into London for this, and we actually had a fantastic time at this restaurant with me, and it was just listeners of the show, and listeners got to meet each other, and they actually formed their own little mini network of innovators and creatives working together. So that was probably the most surprising. I just didn't think people would want to do that. Why? Why would people be interested in having getting together like that? And it was interesting because I shared a lot of personal information in the earlier shows, like my oldest daughter's wedding was coming up at that time, and she's now married and 2 kids and has a great career. But back then, she was just graduating college and was engaged to get married. So at this dinner party, I would start to talk about personal things like, yeah, well, I've got a daughter getting married. And everybody around the table goes, yep, we know, and, hey, I'm getting ready to relocate back to California. Yep, because you shared everything on the show. So it kind of makes for an interesting experience if you've never done that before, where people know a lot about you than you expected. So that's story number 1. Story number 2 was when I flew from London to New York for an event, and the flight was delayed, and it was like 1 or 2 a.m. when I got finally got into New York, got into a cab. This was pre-Uber. Got to the hotel, trudge into the lobby, and there's like 10 people sitting on the couches and in the chairs in the lobby, and I'm come trudging through. I've been flying all day trying to get from London to New York. Turns out the 10 people in the lobby were all listeners of the podcast, and they were there to meet me. So at 2 a.m. in a lobby, in a hotel in New York, with 10 people who been literally sitting there for 5, 6 hours, 7 hours, waiting for me to arrive and for me to finally get there. was probably one of the more stranger experiences, but one of the most rewarding and fulfilling to know that people would want to do that to meet me. I'm just still amazed. I'm amazed every chance I get to meet listeners. And in fact, yesterday I was at an event here in Denver, Colorado, and I was being recognized for an award here in the state of Colorado. And when I came off stage and I'm standing in the lobby, a young gentleman walked up and he was a listener to the podcast, and he asked if he could take a selfie with me. And so I took a selfie with him. I'm just amazed. I do this show for you, and hopefully you find benefit from it. And every interaction, every chance I have to interact with you is highly, highly rewarding. I get so much out of it, and love having those opportunities, and humbled when I hear your stories about things you've done or things you've been able to achieve in the innovation and creativity space. And all that credit goes to you. Maybe I play a little role as a catalyst, but all the credit for whatever you achieve belongs to you. You have earned it. So, as we wrap up today's show, one thing I did want to share with you is what's going to be coming up in season 18. We have actually a fairly growing backlog of shows, interview shows that are coming up. So you're going to want to make sure you are subscribed and following that all the time. You will also, starting March 1st, which should be the day this show is released, starting March 1st, we are running a special 30-day promotion over on the store, which is innovation.tools. Over at innovation.tools, you'll notice that the store has been completely redesigned. New themes, all new refreshed graphics, and a catalog of products that's probably 5 times bigger than what it was before. So this includes everything from books that I think that are inspirational, idea notebooks. If you want to know the specific model of moleskin notebook that I use for all of my idea brainstorming, check it out. It's over there now. To the tools that I use when I'm running and facilitating brainstorming and ideation sessions. The workshops are also over there. And there's also a growing, early, very small, but growing speakers bureau where you can find keynote speakers, facilitators. If you need help running brainstorming sessions, all of that, you can find that over at innovation.tools. But starting March 1 for the month of March, we're offering a special discount, 18%. Figure out where the 18 came from? Season 18, 18% discount. Now, that 18% discount only applies to products that are produced by the innovation.tools. So that would include my book, Beyond the Obvious, the 7 Laws posters, the Killer Question card deck, things that we produce. Everything else that's on there, like the books I read, the moleskin notebooks, you'll find it. You can order them, but you're going to order those over to Amazon. Amazon will be shipping those to you. And I don't have a way to have my discounts apply to things you purchase over on Amazon, but you can find them. You can order. You can click the order button. You'll just get them via Amazon. So take advantage of the 18% discount. Hop on over to innovation.tools. Again, that is for the entire month of March, which is the month we started the show back in 2005. So 18% discount for the entire month. The other change we're happening is, we've talked about the other parts of our organization, one being the Innovators Network. So we are pivoting the Innovators Network. This will be some time. It'll probably be another 2-3 months before it's fully up and operational. But We are pivoting the Innovators Network to be a digital media publishing platform with a whole wide range of contributors that are sharing their podcasts, their YouTube, their articles, all around innovation. So it's not just me, but it will be a broader audience. It'll be a broader set of content. If you've got content that you think might apply over to the over on the Innovators Network, drop me a note. Just send me an email, and you can find me. You can visit philmckinney.com, or you can go to killerinnovations.com and just click contact. Drop me a note and let me know if you want to write articles for the site, if you've got YouTube videos you think will play out, if you've got a podcast that you would want us to help you on distributing. We're all more than willing to do that. Love to have more content, more contributors. If that's something that interests you, let me know. Over on that site, we will also be allowing guest posts. So if you don't want to do a regular article or a regular show, but you've got one article, or you want to write something specific for the Innovators Network, we will be doing that also. So again, just drop me a note and let me know. So that's the what's coming up in season 18. The show, we will be doing our normal episodes. We are aggregating other contributors, not just me, but other thought leaders and others in the innovation and creativity space, bringing and aggregating up that content over at the innovators.network. The site is the old site right now. So if you hop over there right away, you're going to say nothing's changed. That's correct. We are in the middle of a completely new site that will be launched again. It'll be a couple of months yet before it all gets done and it's fully up and available. And we will announce that here when that's available. But that's coming. So therefore, you can go to the Innovators Network, one place to see. You can be able to find a variety of contributors, thought leaders, ideas around creativity and innovation. And then we've got innovation.tools, where we're going to be aggregating up products, workshops, training courses, speakers, facilitators. And again, if you've got products or workshops that you want to have listed over at innovation.tools, just go over to innovation.tools. You'll see a pull down on the pull down menus where you can actually suggest your own or somebody else's products that you think ought to be in that catalog. We want innovation.tools to be the site you go to in order to find the latest and greatest tools, software, products, workshops, training, facilitators, the best out there to help you be successful with your innovation efforts. And with that, we are like way over what we normally do for today's show. So stay tuned, and we'll be telling you more about season 18. Today is the kickoff, and I look so forward to this time. Again, I want to apologize. The show segment went long. I got these 2 pages of questions for the AMA, Ask Me Anything. I wanted to answer all of them, so I apologize. I know we went a little long. But again, thank you for your time today. Thank you for your support and encouragement from the past. I really do appreciate hearing from you. So drop me a note, phil@killerinnovations.com. You can drop me a note. I work very hard at trying to reply to every email that I get. So you can do that. You can also connect with me over on LinkedIn. Let me know that you're a listener to the podcast. I get lots of LinkedIn requests every day. But if you, in your message to me, say that you're a listener to the podcast, it's an automatic accept. I will connect with you on LinkedIn, and then we can also message that way too. Or if you're on Facebook, I tend not to accept friends requests. Follow me over on my page, which is a certified blue check mark on my Facebook page, And then we can connect on Messenger if that's more convenient to you. So I'd love to hear from you. Love to hear your feedback. Love to hear your ideas on what we can do to make the show more valuable for you, deliver better content for you. With that, thanks again for listening to today's show, and again for being a supportive listener. It means a lot. It's the motivation that's allowed us to deliver 17 years of content, and now very proud to start year 18 with this show. And with that, we will be back next week with a new episode of Killer Innovations. Until then, bye-bye.
Podcasting nonstop since 2005, this has been the Killer Innovation Show on the Innovators Network.